Just one prime lens for travel. Sounds good in theory. What if you don't know what to shoot or where you're going? I forced myself to use a different focal length every day, 5 primes for a 6-day trip. But which lens do I pick when I'm tired, a little homesick? Ironically, Taiwan is my home. I haven't been back for 15 years. And getting lost on the streets with the OM3 and my other new camera will be how I get reacquainted with it. Hello, I'm Jack, this is Bokeh Therapy, and for this trip I obviously overpacked, but my back and shoulder pain can be your gain. A visual walkthrough of the 5 most common focal lengths for travel. Out of all these sample photos, I'll choose 5, the ones that best showcase the strength of each focal length. I'll break down the composition, what I like most about these fields of view, so it's important that the video footage I show you matches the perspective of these photos. Luckily, both the OM3 and my new camera have a photo to video switch. Both can shoot 4K 60 video with only a minor crop, so I can immerse you in the exact perspective for every lens for all the photo and video clips. Though I normally like to shoot wide at the start of the trip, on day 1 I chose 40mm. I'm just settling in. I want the foreign to start feeling familiar as soon as possible, and it doesn't get much more comfortable than 40mm. I'm using the 20mm 1.4 Pro on the OM3. That taller 4x3 micro four thirds sensor means there's more vertical real estate. 40 is versatile anyway. If you want to go wide, a 40 can look wide without a hint of distortion around the edges. There's also a little bit of compression once you get close. The f1.4 aperture lets you create shallow depth of field effect. This 20 is sharp but not overly so. I did drop down the clarity and contrast a bit in the edit. It's feather bokeh, and a bit of fringing in the highlights gives these images more character, which helps when using a 40 in everyday scenes, which otherwise looks natural, maybe a little too comfortable. You might want your travel photos to stand out more. That's why this photo is my favorite from the day. An elderly gentleman who took the time to color match his hat with his backpack. I tried framing it from a few different angles. I liked this one the best. Trees and foliage as foreground interest, this motorbike in the background, sandwiching the subject in the middle. Layering, color contrast, a bit of blur, not too much so. A natural look that 40 affords you. Can a 40 be your only prime lens for travel? There's an intimacy with 40, you get close but not too close. Subjects are no more than an arm's length away. This is how I felt coming back to Taiwan 15 years later. Work and kids have kept me away. I've forgotten what it means to be back in my hometown. Motorbikes, street eats, the fading light. Foreign yet familiar all at once. On day 2 I chose 28mm, perfect for establishing shots of the surrounding neighborhood while I start to find my bearings. 24mm is more common in your typical 24-70, 24-105 zoom range, but I prefer 28 as there's less distortion. It does depend on the lens as well as the lens maker as to how much they fudge the actual field of view. The most famous example is the Leica Q series. That 28 Similux is much closer to a 25-26mm field of view. As soon as you tilt the lens a little up or down, place people near the outer third of the frame, things start to look warped. My 28 of choice on this trip is paired with my brand new camera, and distortion is very well controlled. Perhaps the best I've seen on a 28 equivalent. You can get close, keep subjects in the corners to exaggerate leading lines, but still end up with a pleasing result. The downside is that there's not much separation with this focal length, even though this 28 is fast. But why go for a fast 28 when most 28 shooters either manual focus or zone focus? Autofocus on a fast 28 makes sense on the street. You can get close, react more quickly to approaching subjects, exaggerating shapes for more complex compositions. That's why this shot is my favorite from the 28 on day 2. You can feel the heat coming out from the tight street food markets next to the temple, errant plastic bags, ticket orders, menus. I try to pay close attention to the rule of thirds when I'm composing with 28. The distortion of the wider field of view means the subject needs to be a bit closer to the middle than the outer third. The main subject, this woman's neon yellow top, matches the yellow accents all across the frame. Coordinated chaos is why you shoot 28, but can it be your only prime for travel? I thought 28 was too wide, too distorted, but how well corrected this particular 28 was mounted on my new camera made it a pleasure to use. If you're visiting crowded urban cities in Southeast Asia, a 28 would do just fine. You can easily fill your frame in cities that are old and new at the same time. But what about locations that are spread out, less populated? That's when you go for what I went for on day 3. But before we get there, I'm editing this video and look, I know how this looks. Obsessing about gear is the antithesis of good photography. Even other YouTubers, hi Alex, think I'm a madman. I promise there is method to my madness. There are 3 reasons I went through this obsessive exercise. 1, I just bought a new camera, which makes it my 5th system and lens mount. It's really too many and I want to whittle down my lens choices instead of buying every prime all over again. 2, this was a short trip and it wasn't that much gear actually. The OM3 and my new camera are both crop sensor cameras with smaller lenses. Both fit into my Woodencraft Pilot backpack along with my laptop really easily. When I landed, my Pilot 7-liter sling was my daily carry. I had it flat packed on my suitcase on the flight over. Woodencraft is a Taiwan-based company, though I didn't have time to visit their shop this time around. 3, this wasn't a work trip, not a holiday either. It's a personal trip. And honestly, I needed this distraction. On day 3, that classic 35mm, what I previously thought was the top contender for my 1 prime lens for travel. I had such a great time shooting on 28mm the day before that I almost didn't want to switch to 35 on day 3, but the OM3 makes it easy. This is the 17mm 1.8 on the OM3, lens is nice and sharp, well controlled for aberrations, Mark II is weather resistant, but what it lacks in character it makes up for in size. A perfect, almost pocketable setup. There's not much difference between a 28 and 35mm perspective anyway. A 28 with the EVF up to your eye leaning forward is basically the same as a 35 shooting from the hip and the screen leaning back, but a 35 is more selective. You can choose what to leave out of the scene a little easier without moving your feet. There's also more opportunities for shallow depth of field. If bokeh matters to you, this might make the choice of 35 over the 28, and I was surprised at how much separation I got on some of these shots with the OM 17mm 1.8. Micro Four Thirds lenses tend to have a closer minimum focusing distance than the full frame options I'm used to, so what you lack in background separation, you gain in foreground layering. None of these photos are cropped. You see the same 35mm perspective as the lens, but they are edited using my free Lightroom preset that emulates that classic chrome look on the OM3 or ZF. I have tweaked it slightly since the last time, more ambient blues, a bit more grain, both of which you can dial back if you like. But it's free on my website or straight to your inbox in this week's Bokeh Therapy newsletter. I love 35mm, but its fiercest critics think it's boring. Doesn't exaggerate geometry, there's no dramatic portrait isolation, there's nowhere to hide when you use a 35. But these frames and clips shot on a 35mm field of view match my experiences on that day exactly. The working distance makes it so that what you're seeing is where I was standing. No tricks or visual gimmicks. I was walking around a new-to-me shopping district. Everything was new, pristine. Nothing you would immediately associate with classic street photography. That's why this shot is my favorite from day 3. I had to really work to find these leading lines slashing across the top and bottom of the frame, and on a 35 you can play faster and looser with subject placement. You don't really need the rule of thirds so tightly in a 35mm. The subject can be out closer to the periphery of the frame. The proportions still look right. 35 is perfect for documenting the little moments around me. But this location isn't what I remember from my childhood Taiwan memories. The people might be the same, but the backdrop's changed. Or it might just be me. On day 4, I chose a 50, paired with my new travel camera, determined to track down locations that best match my fading childhood memories. You can get a fast and nifty 50 for most systems that's small for not much money, and you have more creative options for subject isolation. This 50 is new to me, but it reminds me of an old familiar 50, and either way, this field of view is too often mislabeled as just for portraits. It's much closer to a general purpose street and travel lens. Sure, it's harder to zone focus a 50 than a 28 or 35, but it's tight, not too tight. Your subject might need to be across the road rather than oncoming traffic, but it's still plenty wide for most travel scenes, even in the compressed chaos of the Taiwanese night markets. Smoke, puddles, pools of light glistening across those back alleyways, all pair beautifully with the 50mm perspective. Still enough room for leading lines, plenty of foreground elements to blur out if necessary. I rarely felt I needed something wider. Can a 50 be your only prime lens for travel? I find I don't have to work that hard to get the proportions looking right on a 50. I can get away with the basic central placement of the subject, no fancy spirals or grids necessary, though I do need to pick the right subject. Then it's a game of sit and wait, let the environment revolve around them. That's why this frame is my favorite from day 4 on the 50. Faded reds, vibrant blues and yellows, motorbikes everywhere, some neon lights. And at the center of it all, a bemused businessman waiting to clock off for the day. It's a throwback look, just like the results coming from this new to me 50. Sharp, contrasty, handles flare really nicely, but there's a bit of that glow to give these retro scenes that extra bit of flavor. And nostalgia was the overwhelming feeling as I walked around Taiwan to close out day 4. All around me was iconography taken straight from my memories. It was a homecoming in more ways than one. Because my new camera is not new, just new to me. For me, digital photography all started with Fuji, and before this trip, I finally picked up a used X-T5. It's not as compact as my OM3, doesn't have the autofocus or full-frame look of my Nikon ZF. So why did I add Fuji back into my kit, and which Fuji lenses did I pick? Day 5 is the last prime and focal length I brought on this trip, a 90. Specifically the 45 1.2 Pro on my OM3, slightly tighter than the 85 I'm used to. It's big for micro four thirds, but very compact compared to a full frame 85. I didn't choose it for that f1.2 aperture, rather the weather sealed nature. It is the only weather sealed telephoto prime available for micro four thirds right now. Taiwan in the summer is stiflingly hot. Humidity crawls its way into every pore and crevice. Everything I brought had to be weather sealed. Rather than focus on whatever the full frame equivalent of that f1.2 depth of field on micro four thirds, I used this 90mm equivalent for subframing. Storefronts at night, street lights and signs. The isolation of a 90 is apropos of this trip. I'm here to look after family, and traveling can be lonely. The one prime to fall back on when I'm tired, a little homesick. My favorite shot on day 5. Because an 85 or 90 is a more restrictive frame, I try to combine composition techniques to add more visual interest. Subframing of the subject by a gigantic yellow and red sign, layering through that hint of color reflected against the car window in the foreground. Can an 85 or 90 be your only prime lens for travel? Probably not. This is the only focal length I brought on the trip that I'm saying this about. Every other focal length I can make it work as my only lens, but an 85 or 90 could be a great visual palette cleanser for vistas in the distance. It's a great companion to any of those other lenses or focal lengths, a short telephoto that's tight but not too much so. With one day left on this trip, tired and homesick, which lens or focal length did I pick? Comes back to why I picked up a used X-T5. Given the recent price increase, it might be the last Fuji camera I buy. The last time I bought anything from Fuji was 7 years ago, my X-T3. I've since moved on to the Nikon ZF and the OM3. But the lens I chose on the last day of this trip is what pulled me back. The quality of Fuji's new lenses, as you've already seen on the 50mm equivalent, that 33mm f1.4 is undeniable. Crazy sharp, a little clinical to some, but at night with the extra grain on that 40MP Fuji sensor, there's oodles of character. But on my final night of this Taiwan trip, I chose the 80mm 1.4. It might be the best Fuji lens I've ever used, but how good that lens is less important than perspective, because less than a week after coming back, even after years away from my hometown, that strange distant feeling had faded. Turns out Taiwan's a street photography haven. I never knew it when I was growing up, and I rediscovered my beginning through 28mm. I no longer felt I had to keep things an arm's length away. That close quarters shooting experience felt like second nature. Just like those all too familiar top dials, film sims, even the quirky autofocus. The X-T5 is a great camera. Not as good as the ZF, I think, and in many ways the OM3 is better, but lenses are what brought me back to Fuji. There's nothing like this 18mm 1.4 in Nikon's Z mount lineup right now, though it does remind me a little bit of Nikon's 28 1.8G in f mount. I'm hoping the next Nikon Z lens 28mm 1.8S. In the meantime, you can find my review of the Voigtlander 28mm f1.5 here when it's ready to go. I'm Jack. This is Bokeh Therapy.